Darren Criss's last collaboration with Ryan Murphy allowed him to run the gauntlet of award shows, and he is now back reteaming with Ryan Murphy for Hollywood, the new series on Netflix. He's also executive producer, co-writer, and star of Royalties. I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby. And Darren, one of the things that's really interesting to me is, these two projects together are really kind of like your first kind of real foray into kind of producing. So I'm curious as what that transition to producing has been like.
I understand that fascination from the outside. It's always interesting. I do so many different things all the time, but I live in an echo chamber of my own experience. And so I forget that my experience with different things doesn't necessarily translate to what people on the outside know about me. So I in my mind, I've always been, I guess, producing in the sense that, this, obviously not to the degree that I have been in the past year alone, but, even in college, like putting shows together and, what it is to put up a musical or a play with your friends. And then we started this production company 10 years ago, Star Kid, which is kind of my first sort of, in my mind, a big break with a sort of a wider audience. So in my mind, I've always been at it in certain ways. And this music festival that I started in New York about 5 years ago, that's been its own kind of set of producing. And I've always been a producer of stuff, kind of manifesting in different ways, but that's always been part of my, I guess, holistic outlook. Even as an actor or a musician or a songwriter, like they are all part of the same, they all use the same mechanics, like keeping in mind the having a bird's eye view and keeping an eye on everything and paying attention to how everything can work together has always been the way that I look at things. And so I was thrilled to, when Ryan ended up, taking this show on, and we were kind of riffing on what we would do together. I was very grateful for his goodwill to ask me to be a producer, which again I thought was a very a graceful thing to do after it was just kind of a conversation that started. By that point, I had already been kind of knee deep in getting ready to make Royalties for Quibi, and that I truly was doing all the things. I was, sort of a microcosm version of Ryan Murphy on that show, where I was involved in absolutely every aspect of that show. And had I done that for Hollywood, which I did at the same time, there's no way I would have been able to survive. So for the most part on Hollywood, I was kind of taking a backseat, and gladly so, role, letting Ryan and Janet Mock and Ian Brennan do their thing on the creative front. But he was very kind to keep me in the know a lot of the times, and I give him a huge debt of credit for early on. I tend to be very I choose wisely with my words when I'm with Ryan, meaning because I don't have a lot of time. I don't write the 6-page emails, which I do. A lot of people who work with me know this. I tend to be very verbose, and my emails, when I'm trying to get an idea across, I try to be as hyper specific as possible, and I write these tomes of information. And when he sent me the first 2 scripts, he wanted to know what I thought. And I said, "Do you really want to know what I think? Because I will send you a lot of stuff, and I don't want you to roll your eyes and say, why did I open this Pandora's box?" And I wrote the whole thing, and he did read it, and he did take into account a lot of the thoughts I had, and he implemented a lot of those things, and I really appreciated that. So, it was they were both different types of producing, but as far as the transition, I haven't really felt like there was a transition, because it's something that I whether or not it's been on paper, I feel like I've been producing in other spaces. So it's something that I've been prepared to do kind of my whole life, because I never take a active back seat unless I really feel like I have to. And so there was really no transition. I was just thrilled to be able to to contribute where I could. I really pride myself on knowing my place. And a lot of times when there are ideas I have and things I'd like to do, when I'm not in that role, if I'm not a producer or directing something, I tend to, keep my mouth shut and make sure that I can be tactful about the ways I approach contributing stuff. And I adhere to the protocol of things, but being in a position where those ideas were welcome and supported was really cool. And not for the ego, but for feeling that true sense of collaboration on both projects.
Well, and with Hollywood, you're playing a really specific character who I think, on the surface would have just been very kind of like, just kind of there moving the story along. But Raymond has some really, interesting things. And I'm thinking of that specifically in the second episode with opposite Michelle Krusek as Anna May Wong, where there's a lot of stuff that we learn about Ray throughout the series, but especially in those first couple of episodes. How did you see Ray, and how did he evolve over the course of the series?
Well, all of it I give to Ryan. I think had I sat down with Ryan at our first meeting when this came up, because it was just us having dinner and just shooting the shit, and I mentioned that I wanted to make this sort of 1940s story. Had I sat down and said, okay, here's the thing: there's a director, there's a writer, there's an actor, and it's a revisionist take on 1940s. Then I would have been like really precious about my idea. But it was a very vague sort of, just again, we were just riffing about stories that we liked about the 40s and how that could be a fun thing to do together if we figured out the story. And so Ryan, when he figured out the story, his first thing that he said to me is like, I want you to play a director. And I said, fine, great, cool. I give credit to Ryan. I had no sort of specific agenda with something, I'd like it to be this or I'd like it to be this. I was very curious to hear what he was going to present. And when he presented this notion of Raymond really wanting to talk about and have a conflict about his half Asian heritage, which I also have, I was curious because we had just done something like that in Versace, and I know he wanted to do something different. And they exist in completely different places, so I can't say that they're too similar. I think Andrew, ran away from that stuff because it was something that he had an internal hatred for himself in general. Whereas I think someone like Raymond is scared to bring up his heritage mainly because of the obstacles that presents for his livelihood and a society that, perhaps this would put him in the box of the other, and he wouldn't want that to get in the way of his dreams. So it was an interesting concept that he brought up, and I had a lot of questions about, why he wanted to include that. And, as the show would evolve and each character kind of comes in with a bit of their own personal history, on and off camera, kind of being imbibed into the characters, it makes for a really multitude of the palette is very varied, that you have whether it's a woman of a certain age with a Jewish background, a young ingenue of a certain age with African American heritage, when you have a young queer writer, there's all these people that kind of add to the different pieces of what could get in the way of the Hollywood construct. And there's plenty of people that aren't necessarily represented, but I think disregarding my own personal heritage would have maybe been a missed opportunity, especially when you consider that we really wanted to include the Anna May Wong story, which is a story that a lot of Hollywood buffs are familiar with. And that was a really nice way to tie that all in together and have his desire to kind of right the wrongs done to her, have that be supported by his own desire to represent Asian American culture in a certain way. So I really give my hat off to Ryan, because that was something that had not occurred to me, and I'm glad that he put it in the story. So that was something that I liked. Other than that, I was just along for the ride. And if whatever Ryan said that he wanted to do, I was like, I'm game. I'll try and say the line and make him believe me.
Well, but there is a certain, I think, he uses that term. I think Ryan has coined that term faction, which is so interesting. But also, it's not even the revisionist aspect; it's the optimism aspect. Because imagine what would have happened if we had had those types of breakthroughs at that time in history, instead of still struggling through it now.
The optimism in this show is almost so brazen and so grand that it almost seems subversive. I think a lot of the people a lot of folks have told me, and I love this reaction, that in this day and age, we're so used to seeing the darkness, the turn, and the really gritty version of things where you wait for everything to just fall to shit, that when everything does kind of get the happy ending and there is this sort of joy upon joy upon joy series of events, it almost is punk rock. Like the pendulum has swung so far in the other direction that when you see that, you're like, whoa, they're really going for it. And what I like about that optimism is there's so many meta layers to this show. People have asked me, what do you think of this revision of Hollywood history that we're seeing? And it really occurred to me that Hollywood is the godfather of revision. That's what it's always done. And, trends have gone back and forth. In the 40s, the movies were this real escape. I find it deliriously ironic and serendipitous and strange and poetic that in the 40s you had an industry that was cranking out films that for a section of the 1940s, at least in the early half, was meant to take people away from their current grim reality, which was an invisible enemy outside of their door, especially for Americans. Obviously parts of Europe and Asia, this was like on the front lines, but without television and the only information you have being from film newsreels that you would see in the theaters, you would go to the theater to get away from this invisible evil, which here we are 80 years later, kind of doing the same thing, where we have Hollywood giving us, and a lot of it's doing very well, a lot of escapist stuff, or stuff that wasn't meant to be escapist, but certainly feels like it because it takes us away from our homes. So it's so funny that this show about that industry doing that thing at that time is a show that people are now watching in lieu of an enemy outside their home. So there's all this weird stuff. But in the 40s, you have this heightened dialogue, this heightened accent. You have everybody saying the perfect line and wearing their hat just so and smoking the cigarette just right. And there was a sort of heightened surreality to the way that these people existed that was not like real life. So, it wasn't until the 60s where you have these movies, this new era of auteurs where they want to show the real human experience with, cussing and sex and violence and tragedy that, that had not happened yet. So we have always, especially then, revised the way that we saw ourselves to bring us to sort of another place, a better place. It's almost like quixotic, Quixotean way of looking at what can be. And so it's funny that we took that mantra and applied it to the 40s themselves. We gave old Hollywood the old Hollywood ending, which is very, very Ryan Murphy. And people ask me if I, base this off anybody. I didn't do this consciously, but by the time I watched the whole series, I was like, holy shit, I'm kind of playing Ryan Murphy. There's this guy that looks at film as a means of social justice, as a social justice crusade, and to show that little monologue that he has about, I don't think movies are just movies. They don't just show us the way the world is. It shows us the way the world can be. And I think that's very much been a prevailing ethos in Ryan's work for the past, almost 15 some odd years.
Well, yeah, and that's actually one of the things that I wanted to touch on also is, because we do live, I think, in a more cynical time. Were you ever concerned, or did you ever have conversations with Ryan about whether or not the show was, and I can't even believe I have to say this, too optimistic, so to speak, or too positive? Was that ever a concern?
Well, that would be I'd be telling the guy who made Glee that. So I'm pretty sure he'd be ready with a response of like, well, that worked. That certainly was a thought that I had. But I think it's done with enough panache that I think the audience is kind of in on it. By the end of it, you kind of get that this is the world we're living in. And I think, it's all about the execution. And I think whatever, trepidations anyone maybe on set may have had, which I don't know if they did. I think if we just hope people watch the damn thing. that I guess I never really proactively worried about there being too much joy, mainly because it was clear that we were leaning into it. You know, if we had all been going on about how this was going to be some dark, gritty look at the 1940s, and it was kind of turning out to end the way that it did, then I would have been concerned. But it became very clear that you know, I think there was a note. It was literally a note from Ryan at one point that he wanted joy upon joy. I even said that earlier in the interview. I mean, it was referencing something that was told to me about the show. I mean, when we started this, before we started, again, back to this dinner, that was the sort of nexus from my involvement in the thing. When I was saying, Ryan, what should we do together? And like, give me some adjectives for this show. Like, what do you think we should do? And he's like, I don't know. I want to do something with you. I want to do something that's young, period, and hopeful. And, you know, the third one being the most, you know, we were going to lean into something joyful. I think he was kind of done with the doom and gloom. I mean, he tends to kind of fluctuate, you know, it's like doom and gloom, you know, super fun, happy time. And then he kind of goes back and forth. So considering we had just come off of doing the Versace series together, I think he really wanted something with that level of I was going to say buoyancy, but just lightness. And it's not without its, you know, there's race relations and misogyny. There's things that are kind of obvious evils and antagonists of the show. I mean, the real antagonist of Hollywood is the 1940s themselves. You know, it's not really any of the people. It's this understanding of the time that's working against them. So I think going in knowing that just kind of makes you go, okay, we're gonna have fun with this one. This one's gonna be a joyous Ryan Murphy thing. And when he really decides to go, he doesn't exist in, he only exists in extremes. The dot only goes to 11. You know what I'm saying? It only
Yes.
goes there. It's 11 and 0. That's it. So if you're going to go happy, go happy.
Well, and that happiness, I think, is one of my favorite moments in the series is during that final episode, during the Academy Awards, where it's not just seeing them win, but also seeing these reactions to these kids at home jumping up and down, that people that look like them or are like them are getting rewarded. And I'm curious if you as a kid ever had that kind of reaction to something, if somebody won an award that made you cheer, oh, I see myself in that person.
I think the people who I had a thought about this that I was just thinking. I think it was something about just how, you know, the word representation, I'll say, I won't get into a whole thesis about this, but when you feel represented by somebody, even before thinking about the media, you know, this is something like when you're a kid, and if, let's say, you're a young boy and you see an older guy, you see an athlete do something, you see them do something great. It's exciting because you're like, well, I could maybe grow up to that. You know, we do it with children, or even in simple ways. You know, when, I don't know, a little girl with red hair sees an older lady with red hair doing something that is connected to succeeding, that on just such a small level is so powerful, you know? So obviously when you have people like marginalized groups of young men and women who see things and see people in the industry that are doing stuff, I mean, that shit is just the most moving, brilliant, those are the special moments. And so I think for me, when I saw people that I just admired, honestly, people that I really loved and looked up to getting recognized on like a huge level, that was almost like it was representing me, because it was representing like my tastes and my hopes. You know, oh, this actor that has made these choices are choices that I really like and really hope to be like in my own lifetime and in my own career. And then when you see them be acknowledged in a certain way at a certain level, you know, it's symbolic of something so much greater, of like, wow, I guess like this is something that is possible if I want to do and be like this person. So I had, you know, just, I know that sounds really really broad and vague.
No, it's fine.
It is very specific. I mean, there's a reason for why people who don't even really follow, you know, awards line stuff or you know, awards politics like you and I do, you know, there's something to be said of when just people that don't follow movies watch the Oscars and are moved by people's acceptance speeches, because you see these moments for people which are just inherently inspiring. So I was always inspired just by people who I really were moved by being recognized. That always, it gets me every year. For at any awards thing, it's just always
You're a softie.
What's that?
You're a softie.
I am a softie because, and it's not
That's
just
okay,
because I'm
so
in the
am I.
industry. It's the same thing with like sports or anything, or just anytime any individual is recognized for working super hard for something, is just, there's just no other way to say it. I've said it 5 times. I'm looking at my mental thesaurus, but it's just inspiring. It's a very moving experience. And so that has always been a source of inspiration for me. What can I say? I can't nail it down to one person.
No, but is that kind of admiration, is that what led you to Royalties? Because we don't often, the songwriters are often the people that we don't know unless you follow music and are enshrined in it.
Well, if we're going to go to Royalties, that's its own, bravo on the segue, that's its own sort of a breadcrumb trail we got to follow. Well, Royalties, so in my life, I was mentioning earlier how I live in like my echo chamber, of I know what I do, but not everybody else. I'm not going to assume everybody else on the outside knows. So, when you're an artist that does a bunch of stuff, much like actors who have different parts of them that they like to show, there's this constant negotiation of trying to show what you do, of meeting people between what they know you for and what you want them to see, right? So there's that give and take, and if you're lucky enough, you can kind of meet in a place that you want. So for me, the music thing, particularly songwriting and music production, is such a huge part of my life and takes a great deal of my passion and my time, equal to the amount of time that I'm doing the acting thing. But if the music thing is here and the acting thing is here, obviously this has more exposure because the nature of the job is just visible, whereas this side is inherently invisible and is behind the scenes. So I do so much already as it is. I'm running around doing way too many different projects. So Royalties to me was always a way that I could just put it all in one place, Why go to like the 15 different birthday parties where you can just have them all in one venue? So that's kind of how this came to be many years ago. I really wanted to be able to, aggregate all the things that I was passionate about and put it in one central place. And having this dual citizenship between both worlds, I started to see very quickly, especially on Glee, where the lines of communication, where things get lost in translation. Music people are trying to accomplish this, but the film people are trying to accomplish this, and maybe they don't necessarily speak the same language. And it's why musical films are very difficult, and it's why I've been an admirer of them for so long. And when they work, I'm so inspired because there's just a lot of pieces. And I slowly, unconsciously was getting my kind of master's degree in how you can put these two things together in not even in an artistic way, because they've always been embedded together, but in a logistical way that can be really fun for my own strength. So I've been sitting on this for years and years and years. And the very concept of songwriting is, or the livelihood of songwriting, or being a session songwriter, as we say in the songwriting business, is, it's a serial comedic construct. You have a session with an artist or a different writer every time, and you kind of have to put your heart on the chopping block. You have to kind of create something from nothing. And it is this very silly comedy of errors, because there are the famous, beautiful stories of inspiration of Carole King in Laurel Canyon writing one of the greatest albums of all time. And those exist, but they are the minority. For people whose 9-to-5 livelihood is writing songs, it is a very utilitarian, unsexy, unglamorous job that oftentimes the inspiration doesn't come from some crazy life experience. It comes from, we got to get this done by the end of the day. Let's churn out something. And I've always liked that kind of playing with people's expectations of the magic of songwriting and what it is when it's just your job. What happens when creativity is your 9-to-5 and you're fighting that constant battle between, the age old, the yin and yang of commerce and creativity, right? Mm. If that's your day-to-day slog, what's that like? And above all, there's the brilliant comedic setup of what is it like to be the person that is single-handedly responsible for some of the biggest moments in people's pop cultural existence, but have the hardest time getting into the after party because nobody recognizes you or knows your name. If that's not set up for a comedy, I don't know what is. So I was so keen on making this. And so we finally did when we made like a little pilot presentation, and then Quibi was interested, and thank God I'm here now, because I made that at the same time as Hollywood, and it was one of the most, it was one of the craziest times of my life. It was the most concurrently fulfilling, exciting, and absolutely frustrating, agonizing, and miserable times of my professional career, because we somehow pulled off both.
Well, I could literally talk to you forever about this.
Yeah, I'm sure. And you're doing double duty too, my man. So you know a thing or two about putting on two hats at the same time.
Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Emmys, and stay tuned for more interviews throughout the season. Darren Criss, congratulations. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, man. I appreciate it.